everyone! Welcome to Mathflix with Sir Paul. In this episode, we'll try to solve for the limits of functions using table of values. Let's start with this one. Let's solve for the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1. I want you to focus on two things. First, our function, which is f of x is equal to x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1. And second, our x approaches 1. Meron tayong dalawang direction to approach 1 from. We can approach 1 from the left and we can approach 1 from the right. Since we can approach 1 from these two directions, we'll have two table of values. Let's start with our table of value for the function f of x is equal to x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1. But in this case, our x approaches 1 from the left. Let's fill out our x column. Sabi natin, our x approaches 1 from the left. So, yung gusto nating mga values dito ay yung mga values less than 1. I'll start with 0.5. Take note that you can start at any value less than 1. Then from here, we choose values closer and closer to 1. For the next value, I'll have 0.88. Closer to 1, I'll have 0.996. Closer to 1, we have 0.9999. As you can see here, our x approaches 1 from the left. Now let's have our f of x column. To solve for f of x, isa-substitute lang natin yung mga values natin sa x natin sa ating function. Let's start with 0.5. Substituting 0.5 to f of x is equal to x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1. Our f of x is negative 3.5. Substituting 0.88, I have negative 3.12. Substituting 0.996, I have negative 3.004. And substituting 0.9999, I have negative 3.0001. Now let's investigate. Saang value lumalapit ng ating f of x as our x approaches 1 from the left? Obviously, it approaches negative 3. Therefore, the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1 from the left is equal to negative 3. Ngayon naman, let's have the limit of our function as x approaches 1 from the right. In this case, since we approach 1 from the right, our x values here should be greater than 1. I'll start with 1.5. And then from here, I'll get closer and closer to 1. For the next value, I'll have 1.17. Next, I'll have 1.003. And lastly, I'll have 1.0001. As you can see here, our x approaches 1 from the right. Now, let's have the f of x column. Again, substitute lang natin yung mga values na to sa ating function. Let's start with 1.5. Substituting 1.5 to our function, f of x is equal to negative 2.5. Substituting 1.17, I have negative 2.83. Substituting 1.003, I have negative 2.997. And lastly, substituting 1.0001, I have negative 2.9999. Now let's investigate. Saang value lumalapit ng ating f of x as x approaches 1 from the right? Obviously, our f of x approaches negative 3. Therefore, the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1 from the right is equal to negative 3. Now, these values are our one-sided limits. The limit of the function as x approaches 1 from the left is equal to negative 3, and the limit of our function as x approaches 1 from the right is also negative 3. Yung wala namang naka-raise sa negative at positive, yun ay ang ating two-sided limit. Tatandaan nyo lang na para mag-exist ang ating two-sided limit, dapat parehas ang value ng ating one-sided limits. In this case, our one-sided limits are both negative 3. Therefore, our two-sided limit is the same value, which is negative 3. Our final answer is the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1 is equal to negative 3. Para mas maintindihan pa natin, let's have another example. Let's solve for the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0. Our function here is f of x is equal to the absolute value of x and our x approaches 0. Let's start constructing our table of values for the limit of our function as x approaches 0 from the left. Again, since our x approaches 0 from the left, our values for x here will be less than 0. I'll start with negative 0.3. From here, I'll get closer and closer to 0. For the next value, I'll have negative 0.01. Next, I'll have negative 0.0009. And lastly, I'll have negative 0.00000001. As you can see here, our x values approaches 0 from the left. Let's have our f of x column. Substituting negative 0.3 to our function, we have 0.3. Substituting negative 0.01, I have 0.01. Substituting the third value, I have 0.00009. And lastly, substituting the last value, I have 0.00000001. Now let's investigate. Saang value lumalapit ang ating f of x as our x approaches 0 from the left? Your answer must be 0. That means that the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0 from the left is equal to 0. Now let's have the table of value for the limit of our function as x approaches 0 from the right. Since our x approaches 0 from the right, yung mga values natin sa x column will be greater than 0. I'll start with 0.3. From here, I'll get closer and closer to 0. For the next value, I'll have 0.01, next 0.00009, and lastly, I'll have 0.00000001. Our x here approaches 0 from the right. Let's have the f of x column. Substituting 0.3 to our function, I have 0.3. Substituting the second value, I have this. Substituting the third and the last values, I have the following values for f of x. Now let's investigate. Saang value lumalapit ang ating f of x as our x approaches 0 from the right? Obviously, our f of x approaches 0. That means that the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0 from the right is equal to 0. Now these two are our one-sided limits. For our two-sided limit to exist, dapat parehas ang values ng ating one-sided limits. In this case, our one-sided limits are both 0. Therefore, our two-sided limit is also 0. Our final answer is the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0 is equal to 0. Ngayon naman, try natin ang isang mas challenging na problem. Let's try to solve for the limit of f of x as x approaches 4, wherein our function is the piecewise function f of x equals x plus 1 if x is less than 4, and x minus 4 quantity squared plus 3 if x is greater than or equal to 4. Note that our x approaches 4. Let's start constructing our table of values for our function as x approaches 4 from the left. Ang tanong dito, alin sa dalawang functions ng ating piecewise function ang ating gagamitin for this table of values? Since in this table, our x approaches 4 from the left, gusto natin na ang x values natin ay less than 4. In our piecewise function, as you can see, sa ating first function, meron tayong condition na if x is less than 4. Ibig sabihin, ito yung gagamitin nating function sa ating table of values as x approaches 4 from the left. Next, pili tayo ng starting value for our x column. Let's start with 3.7. Then we'll get closer and closer to 4. For the next value, I'll have 3.85. Next, I'll have 3.995. And lastly, I'll have 3.99999. As you can see here, our x approaches 4 from the left. Substituting 3.7 to our function, I have 4.7. Substituting 3.85, I have 4.85. Substituting the third and the fourth value, I'll have the following f of x values. From here, let's investigate. Saang value lumalapit ang ating f of x as our x approaches 4 from the left? Obviously, our f of x approaches 5. Therefore, the limit of our function as x approaches 4 from the left is equal to 5. Ngayon naman, let's have the table of values for the limit of our function as x approaches 4 from the right. Since our x approaches 4 from the right, gusto natin na ang values ng x natin dito ay greater than 4. Kaya naman, hahanapin natin sa ating piecewise function yung function under the condition x greater than 4. Kapag nakita na natin, that is the function that we will be using for this table of values. Now, let's choose a starting value for our x column. I'll start with 4.3. From here, I'll get closer and closer to 4. For the next value, I'll have 4.1. Next, I'll have 4.001. And lastly, I'll have 4.00001. As you can see here, our x approaches 4 from the right. Let's have the f of x column. Substituting 4.3 to our function, I have 3.09. Substituting 4.1, I have 3.01. Substituting the third and the fourth value, I have the following f of x values. Kung mapapansin nyo dito, saang value lumalapit ang ating f of x as x approaches 4 from the right? Obviously, our f of x approaches 3. Therefore, the limit of f of x as x approaches 4 from the right is equal to 3. Now, these are our one-sided limits. For the two-sided limit, tatandaan lang natin na dapat parehas ang ating one-sided limits. In this case, the limit of our function as x approaches 4 from the left is different from the limit of the function as x approaches 4 from the right. The values are 5 and 3 respectively. Since our values in our one-sided limits are different, the two-sided limit does not exist. Therefore, the limit of the function as x approaches 4 does not exist. Kaya naman, tatandaan nyo lang na kapag magkaiba yung values ng ating one-sided limits, the two-sided limit won't exist. In our next episode, we'll try to find the limits of functions given their graphs. If you learned something from this video, do not forget to share this to your friends and your classmates. Also, comment down below kung ano pa yung mga math topics na gusto nyong i-discuss natin sa ating mga series. I know that online class has been very challenging to some of our students and also our teachers, but I believe that as we work together, we can survive through this. Again, I am Sir Paul, and this has been Mathflix with Sir Paul. Thank you for watching.